Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the ADB Southeast Asia Development Symposium. My name's Lisa Oak. I'm going to be your host for a couple of panels this morning, and we are going to be discussing immunization against COVID-19 and recovery and what that's going to look like. So our first plenary panel today is entitled Immunization for All, Providing COVID-19 Vaccines Across Southeast Asia. Now, before we get going on that, we're going to point out that you are going to be able to ask questions today. As our speakers appear on the screen, if a question pops in your mind and you think, hey, I'd like to ask that, by all means, go to the app in the upper right-hand side of your screen. There's going to be a chat icon, and you can simply click on that, type your question into the chat box, and it'll come directly to me here in Singapore, and I will do my best to try to get all of your questions out to our panel of expert speakers today. And there's also going to be some polling questions. We'll be putting those up a little bit later for you to take a look at and to take part in the polls. And let's get our first one up there. As a matter of fact, we've got, please indicate which Southeast Asian country are you from. You can take your time in answering that, and we'll come back to it later just to get an idea of where you're all watching from this morning with your coffees and everything and your home computers, as we've all been doing since the beginning of this pandemic. Now, it's been a year since COVID-19 really turned our entire world upside down. As of this morning, the latest numbers, 121 million infections worldwide, more than 2.68 million lives lost, almost 2.7 million people. So many of us know someone or have lost someone in this pandemic. And the worst part of it has been the sense of helplessness that we've all felt. But now the vaccines have arrived. There are several of them, in fact. And the challenge for medical experts and government leaders is how to roll them out, how to overcome vaccine hesitancy and get those shots into arms worldwide, and just getting enough of them. Also, a huge issue. And here in Southeast Asia, we are lagging behind. There's vaccine supply issues, hesitancy issues, combined with a lack of funding and also logistics as well. So I'm going to introduce you to an absolutely amazing panel of medical experts and vaccine manufacturers today, and we are going to hear what they've been doing over the past year to get ready for this moment. So let's get right to it and introduce you to our panelists. We've got Dr. Patrick Osewe. He is the Chief of Health Sector Group for the Asian Development Bank, and Patrick has helped the ADB implement its almost $30 billion response to COVID-19. So good to see you there, Dr. Patrick. Thanks for joining us today. We have Dr. Myrna Cabotaje. She is the Undersecretary of Health for the Philippines, and they are trying to roll out 50 to 70 million vaccines by 2023 in that country. And they've set up social listening groups. They monitor social media to try to see what's being said about vaccine hesitancy, and they tackle it head on. So some real innovation there on that front. Good to see you there, Dr. Myrna. We're looking forward to speaking with you. Another doctor joining us today, Dr. Ruth Karron. Dr. Ruth is a professor for the Department of International Health at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and she is the director of the Center for Immunization Research. Now, Dr. Karron is an expert on infectious diseases. She is a virologist. She is a vaccinologist, and she has also studied the development of immune response in low-income, low-resource settings. So a lot of expertise there that we'll be tapping into over the next hour. Dr. Suresh Jadhav is the Executive Director of the Serum Institute of India. Now, SII is the biggest manufacturer of vaccines in the entire world, hands down, and they have provided more than half of the COVID vaccines used so far in the World Health Organization's COVAX program. Thanks for joining us today, Dr. Suresh. And Jin Park is the Vice President for Global Business Development at SK Bioscience. She has spearheaded agreements with AstraZeneca and Novavax for their COVID-19 vaccine production. And Jin and her team, by the way, they've also partnered with many charitable organizations, including the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations, to help develop global vaccine programs around the world for some of the underprivileged among us. And great work, all of you. I know it's been an incredible year, a stressful year, a busy year for sure. And what I'd like to start with is I'd like for each of you to give us the view from your desk and tell us about what your biggest challenge has been over the past 12 months, 6 months, whatever time frame is the most relevant for you. Just tell us about your role in regard to getting the COVID-19 vaccine administered. What's it meant? What have you been doing? Let's start with you, Dr. Patrick, and take it from there.
Thank you very much, Lisa, for those opening comments. So ADB is the second largest development bank in the world after the World Bank. And we have allocated $9 billion to support our developing member countries to obtain and to deploy vaccines. And per capita, it's the highest allocation of any development bank in the world. And so we've been working with our developing member countries to look at various options and to ask two questions. First is, are the countries ready for vaccines? And to be able for a country to be ready, there's been a lot of work going on in this area, supported by led by the Ministry of Health, but supported by UNICEF, WHO, and other development partners to conduct assessment to look at the current immunization program for children. To what extent can that be expanded to absorb vaccines that are actually mostly for adults? And there are various aspects there, looking at who is going to get the vaccine first, because the numbers are huge, the vaccines are not enough. Second, what type of cold chain arrangement is available, because these COVID vaccines are very complex. Some require minus 70 degrees centigrade for storage, some requires minus 20, some requires 2 to 8 degrees centigrade. So and many countries will have more than one vaccine in a country. So then how do you transport the vaccines from the capital city to various primary care facilities? And some of our countries are very complex. Indonesia, 17,000 islands, Philippines, 7,000 islands. How do you do all that? And then how do you then move it from the primary care facility to areas where you're vaccinating people? Complex issues. Then the second question we are asking is the population ready? You can have all the vaccines, but if the population is not ready, they might not come to be vaccinated. So what kind of system do you put in place? What kind of communication do you put in place to ensure that people are actually vaccinated when the vaccines are available? So a lot of issues that we're dealing with, but we're working closely with many partners, private sector, public sector, civil society organizations to ensure that we meet this objective.
All right, so many factors at play there: vaccine hesitancy, vaccine supply, logistics. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Patrick. Dr. Myrna, jump in here and tell us what your experience has been like from your desk in the Philippines. And Dr. Myrna, you're on mute right now, so we'll just get you to unmute yourself. We all do that from time to time, don't we?
Yes, thank you, Lisa. As far as the Philippines, we are challenged with a very big population to immunize and the problem of availability of vaccine. So we have decided to go on a portfolio of vaccine from various manufacturers, and we are fortunate that we have some donations from other countries and from the COVAX. We are really challenged also by how to distribute, as Dr. Osewe was saying, how to distribute the different kinds of vaccine depending on their cold chain temperatures, how to make it from the capital to the different archipelagic areas in the Philippines.
Yes, it's certainly a big job there. And I almost didn't unmute myself too as well. So it's something I always have to be keeping in mind when we're doing these panel discussions on Zoom. Interesting point you make there, Dr. Myrna, about the Philippines. And I want to get a poll up very quickly that we took in the beginning of this panel discussion, showing where everyone is across the region. And I just want to highlight that 72.7% of our viewers today are watching from the Philippines. So of course, they're going to be paying very close attention to what you have to say when it comes to rolling out this vaccine over in your home country. Dr. Ruth Karron, let's get you in here, Dr. Ruth, and tell us your expertise, your knowledge on this issue. It's so incredibly deep. What have you been paying attention to over the past year, and what do we need to do from here? Tell us what you're seeing.
Yeah, so Lisa, thank you so much. I'm really delighted and honored to be with you today. You know, we're here a year after WHO declared a pandemic. Amazingly, a year later, we have 11 vaccines that are approved in some way for global use, and we have others that are in development. And global implementation of these vaccines is expanding through manufacturing agreements, rollouts through COVAX, bilateral agreements that countries have, some of which are funded by mechanisms like APVAX. But despite all of these incredible advancements, we won't turn the tide of the pandemic until we convince people to take these vaccines. As many people have said, no one is safe until everyone is safe. So we've been focusing a lot in the U.S. on vaccine confidence. I like to speak about vaccine confidence rather than vaccine hesitancy, and improving confidence. Every country has its own experience with vaccines and its own concerns, and every country will need to find its own way to inspire confidence in COVID-19 vaccines. And today in our discussion, what I'm hoping is that I'll be able to share with you some of our experiences that perhaps might be relevant to people listening today.
All right, looking forward to it. Dr. Suresh, jump in here and fill us in. You have India, 60% of the world's vaccine manufacturing capability. What do things look like from your viewpoint over this past year?
Thanks, Lisa. I think it's a pleasure to be on the Southeast Asia Development Symposium 21. I think as a manufacturer, one of the major challenge that we faced last year was to keep on the existing vaccine manufacturing, which we do for the EPI products on, so that there is no shortage of the routine EPI vaccines. And in addition to that, then create the new facility for making the COVID vaccines. And when we make a new facility, this is a totally new process because this was a totally new virus at that time. And once you standardize a process, you have to ensure that you get all your raw materials and all your equipments in place, which is required for this new product, and then keep it on. Because vaccine is a very dynamic business in the sense you have to keep improving and improvising on your existing processes to meet the current CGMP requirements and the regulators' expectations. And fortunately for us, I think, although there was a lockdown which was declared all over the world and more so in India right from the beginning, but the factory workers were allowed to come in the pharmaceutical sector, and therefore the work was never affected. So that was the great, I think, support we got from the government, and also the support what was received was the regulatory clearances, which help us in starting and taking on this COVID challenge on a full way. Fortunately, we are now one product which is already licensed and which is used in the country. We have already supplied to more than 71 countries so far, almost about 59 million doses. And in India, we have supplied more than 66 million doses, out of which almost about 40 million doses have been used. So we have got that experience also. And hopefully with our increased production now, we will be able to meet the requirements both within the country as well as for the COVAX facility.
The numbers are staggering. Looking forward to hearing more about your manufacturing process. Jin, jump in here. Speaking of overwhelming demand for a product, tell us what your world has been like over the past year.
Thank you, Risa. So it is my pleasure to be participating in this discussion. So actually, I have never noticed this kind of intensive collaborations and partnership in vaccine industry since I joined vaccine industry around 10 years ago. So I thankfully, I was engaged in some of the collaboration and partnership in this industry. So as a BD person, actually, as you know, the quick development of the COVID-19 vaccines is very unprecedented and encouraging in order to put an end to the pandemic. However, the this kind of the expedited process has created concerns from safety, efficacy, and quality, aspects. So the licensed products for emergency use in general could not fulfill all regulatory requirements generally requested for registration in ordinary times. I mean, non-pandemic, era. So also from a business perspective, many legal settings such as advanced procurement agreement and also license agreement require the long and hard due diligence process to make sure quality, safety, and efficacy, as well as intellectual property status and multiple areas before the deal. But unfortunately, not in this pandemic situation. It's because we should be in very hurry. So it means that all participants are not only, vaccine manufacturers, but also governments, people, vaccine players, all stakeholders should take different types of risk as benefit is believed to outweigh the associated risk. But the issue is that, we don't know what would be the expected risk, and also we may not be able to establish all the countermeasures for all those kind of potential risk.
Yeah, all of the frameworks that worked before no longer really they don't apply anymore. The rule books are gone out, and everyone's just sort of collaborating the best they can to get these vaccines into arms around the world. We're going to delve into what the vaccination efforts in Southeast Asia are going to look like in the coming months, and what the challenges are, and how we're going to make this happen. But first, I want to step back and take a look at what's happening on the global scene right now and talk about vaccine nationalism. The EU, they've extended their controls over the export of vaccines, as we've been hearing about in their spat with the UK. And the US has implemented the Defense Production Act, and they are limiting the exports of materials, as Dr. Suresh just mentioned, that are needed to make these vaccines around the rest of the world. So from a big picture perspective, as we are seeing vaccine nationalism occur, what is that going to mean for Southeast Asia? Patrick, let's start with you on this one.
Well, this is a big challenge because so far the bulk of vaccine manufacturers are in Europe and North America, and of course we have some in our region. If there is vaccine nationalism, whereby Europe is preventing the exports of vaccine. I recall the fight between Australia and the EU, where Australia wanted AstraZeneca vaccine, and basically Italy petitioned that no vaccine should be sent to Australia, and Canada wanted vaccines from the US, and the priority for the US right now is to have enough vaccines for the country. And that becomes a big challenge for our developing member countries. And as ADB, we are reaching out, discussing with a variety of companies to see what are the options. So this COVAX facility that is providing vaccines to 92 low to middle income countries. And they're in agreement with companies like the Serum Institute of India to provide them with vaccines. But then COVAX has to provide vaccines to all the countries. So if they get the first batch, they have to distribute to all the countries, and then they get the second batch and distribute to all the countries for equity purposes. But that's a very slow process. So some of the countries have decided, in our region, have decided to get into bilateral negotiations with various companies. It's tough because there aren't sufficient vaccines, but many companies are also trying to increase their capacity to be able to supply the market. So many countries have come up with very ambitious targets. For instance, in Indonesia, population of 270 million, they would like to vaccinate 181 million people in 14 months. Or the Philippines, that 110 million people, they try to vaccinate 60 million people in a period of 24 months. Very ambitious targets. Of course, the underlying issue there is, are there sufficient vaccines to be able to do this? So, but with resources from the development banks, from the World Bank, from ADB and others, at least the manufacturers can see that there is enough market to be able to produce vaccines because there are many customers.
You raise an excellent point about ambitious vaccination targets, and Dr. Myrna, we'll get to you in that in just a moment. First, Dr. Suresh and Jen, I'd like you both to weigh in on if this vaccine nationalism that we are seeing, if the Defense Production Act in the United States, is that making it more difficult for you to do your jobs and produce vaccines? Dr. Suresh.
Yeah, certainly it will make our job very difficult. But as on today, because of the quantities that we have already procured from them, maybe anticipating that something of this sort may happen, because there was an indication which was given during the previous regime that they may implement the Defense Production Act. So for another 5-6 months, we don't see any problem, but certainly it will affect the production. I think, but the national, this vaccine nationalism is definitely going to be a challenge. Fortunately, what has happened is I think the major vaccine manufacturing capability is in Southeast Asia. Most of the vaccine manufacturers are either in India, China, Indonesia, Thailand, and South Korea. And chunk of the vaccine is going to be manufactured in this part of the world. So we will have to sort of see, with the help from ADB, that the other manufacturers also are encouraged, because there are several manufacturers who have got several products in their pipeline, and if they can also come out with their production and get it licensed, then this shortage of vaccine that we see today could be minimized.
Jen, jump in here and give us your perspective on this. You are in South Korea. Is that going to make transferring product down to Southeast Asia and helping us reach our vaccination targets easier? What's your view on that? And many vaccine makers, they don't want to transfer technology to other companies, and they don't feel comfortable managing multiple production sites. What is all of this going to mean for our efforts?
Actually, in the ordinary times, it was more challenging, I think. However, I believe that the pandemic response actually changed a lot the landscape of the, particularly the in demand and supply of the tech transfer, or the to the third party, and also localization of the vaccine manufacturing capabilities outside of their country. From a demand perspective, actually, as Dr. Suresh mentioned, there are around 300 programs under development, which means that previously most of the vaccine developers are the multinational companies. And they dominated vaccine industry for long years, as well as the manufacturing capacity, and also the other areas as well. However, I believe the more companies who have the vaccine technology programs, which usually don't have proper the capabilities in manufacturing and or the global presence in marketing, they will, I think, actively collaborate with, the other companies, I guess. And also from from a demand perspective, I believe that after pandemic or during the pandemic, I guess that many of the governments, which especially don't have manufacturing capabilities in their country and suffer from the procurement of the vaccines, by themselves, would pursue for the localization of the manufacturing facility in the given countries. So I think they may provide some kind of supportive measure to, to give some incentive for vaccine developers or vaccine manufacturers. So I believe that anyhow, nobody knows, even though we have taken into consideration for the overcapacity after pandemic. However, this kind of, the collaboration after pandemic would play a role in, better respond to the next pandemic. So this situation is totally different from, what we have experienced in, the pre-pandemic, era.
Absolutely different in every way, shape, and form. Dr. Ruth, I want you to jump in here. What lessons do you think that Southeast Asia might glean from the large-scale vaccine rollouts in other countries that you've witnessed?
Yeah, so I'll speak, particularly to issues around vaccine confidence, because I think that's something that has been really an issue in our country, and I think something that we've had to work very hard on, and something that countries in Southeast Asia can each think about how it would apply in their particular situation. There are a few things. I highlight 4 things. One is to build confidence in your healthcare workers, because if your healthcare workers are not getting vaccinated, it's hard for the rest of the population to be confident. That's been an issue in our country, and something that I think we're still working on. The second thing is to really have scientists, physicians like me, partnering with trusted community leaders to communicate effectively. Very often these are faith leaders. And it's especially important to reach out to communities that may have been marginalized and communities that don't trust. The third thing that might be of particular interest to you, Lisa, is that I think journalists play a critical role, and the media plays a critical role in this. And it's really important for us as scientists to communicate effectively with journalists so that they can convey our messages to the public and address mistaken beliefs. And I think the 4th thing is really around open communication. I think it's really important for us to say what we know and what we don't know. So for example, we don't know today how long immunity from these vaccines will last. We don't have those data. We don't know in general whether we'll need boosters, and we don't know whether we're going to need to we are already starting to manufacture vaccines against the variants. We don't know if we're going to need to use them. And I think it's very important for us to admit that there are things that we don't know and that we're learning, to really be completely transparent.
We have a question from a viewer now that I think speaks directly, sums up beautifully what some of these concerns are that you've been talking about. So this is from Tek Bahadur Katawara. He's with the Association of Bhutanese Tour Operators in Bhutan. And the question is, at this point of time, the vaccine is important for everyone, but there are rumors that some vaccines have immense side effects, including DNA distortion. Could you elaborate on the particular safety aspects? Who'd like to take this question? Open floor. Please, Ruth, jump in. Why don't
I start, and then my colleagues can chime in. So one of the this caller highlights an important thing, which is, these are new platforms that we're talking about, and I think he's probably focusing particularly on some of the mRNA vaccines we have, or the adenovirus vectored vaccines. And so there is hesitancy associated with the fact that these are not vaccines that are familiar to people. They're not, for example, what we've used for EPI vaccines. It's really important for us to, as Dr. Myrna has talked about, to be listening to what these kinds of rumors are so that we can respond. What I would say is that, it is a common myth, a common rumor that these vaccines can alter your DNA, and that's simply not true. So it's these vaccines don't interact with your genes. They don't interfere with your genes. What all of these vaccines do in one way or another is help your body. Either they give you spike protein, or they help your body manufacture spike protein so that you can develop an immune response to it.
Dr. Ruth, thank you so much for that comprehensive answer. Let's get over to Undersecretary Cabotaje now. And Dr. Myrna, give us your view, first of all, your response to that question. And then we have a couple of viewer questions for you as well.
I'd just like to have a rejoinder to what Dr. Ruth was saying. In the Philippines, we have a vaccine expert panel. So this is a group that looks at the different vaccine platforms and advises us on what to procure. And based on the evaluation by this vaccine expert panel, we have a comms group that now tries to relay to the public what is the truth about everything. No, so I'd like to highlight what Dr. Ruth mentioned, the importance of a scientist position. So in terms of this question on whether there is alteration in the DNA, I am not a scientist, but we ask our scientists to weigh in and have their positions in public. And I think this gives some confidence, as also Dr. Ruth was mentioning. We have to be honest. What we know now, what we do not know, and the speed of development, the fastest when in 1 year we were able to have the vaccine manufactured compared to the previous vaccines, which takes about 7 to 10 years, and the speed at which developments also occur.
It's been incredible. It has been incredible. As a journalist, I've been watching this unfold, and it's been absolutely staggering. And for the record, I've received both jabs of the Pfizer vaccine, and I've felt absolutely great. I've had no issues and no complications with it at all. A couple of questions coming in from the Philippines. One from John Andrew Orake, just asking about how quickly you plan on getting the general population vaccinated, and your goal is to have 50 to 70, I believe, by 2023, you said earlier. I want to combine John Andrew's question with what Patrick was saying earlier about how some of the targets are a little ambitious. Are you feeling confident that you'll be able to get that many people vaccinated over the next year and a half?
Yes, our target initially, the vaccines become available, was try to get as many people vaccinated for 2021. But our problem really is the availability of the vaccines. We are targeting 50 to 70. Dr. Patrick was saying 60, because the general thinking is we are going to have herd immunity with more people vaccinated. But of course, our challenge is being able to get the quantity of vaccines ready, no? So in terms of the question, what are our plans of deployment? We are following we initially followed the WHO SEADS prioritization. So that puts the health workers, because they're most at risk, and this is the reciprocity principle. And the next category is our senior citizens. But we now customized and included as third priority our persons with comorbidities, and the fourth are the economic frontliners. So it will take some time before we go into the general public, but we have always been communicating that we have this prioritization framework, and it will depend on the number of vaccines that will be arriving. And like in terms of vaccine nationalism, yes, we're having some problems. Some of our countrymen would like the the Western vaccines, but it's difficult to obtain them. But thanks to COVAX, they're trying to have some vaccines available. So we are left with some bilateral agreements now with our Chinese friends from the People's Republic of China. Initially, there was some wait and see attitude. No, many preferred the Western vaccines, but when we started doing our vaccine jobs with our Chinese vaccines, and then the uptake was improving.
Okay, so the political will is there, the framework is in place. You just need the product to roll out, is what you're saying. So let's take it over to Suresh and to Jin right now and talk a little bit about manufacturing. Dr. Suresh, we were chatting before this panel, and you were telling me that excess capacity, if India were to build as many facilities as needed to produce all of the vaccines that are required, there's a risk from a business perspective that when the pandemic is over, you'll be left with all of this excess manufacturing capacity. How big of a concern is that for you right now? Run us through the argument.
Yeah, Lisa, I think fortunately what happened for Serum Institute is a little different story. We already have almost about 8 to 9 products in our pipeline, which are going to come in next 9 months to another 2 to 3 years of time. All these products are in different clinical stages, either in phase 1, phase 2, or even phase 3. What has happened is, because we were making these new products, which were in clinical stages, the infrastructure for making those products was ready, the machinery was in place, it was validated, and we could utilize those facilities and infrastructure and convert it for making the COVID vaccine. Of course, it required a lot of investment to tailor it down exactly as it required for the COVID. So for us, that may not be a huge problem. But some new manufacturer who invest only in making a COVID vaccine, and if COVID vanishes or if the requirement is not there after 3 to 4 years of time, then they will have to figure it out how they are going to utilize that facility and for which product. And unless there is a support from the financial institution and their respective governments, I think these companies will be in dire problem. I think I would like to just give you another example based upon the previous question. Most of the developed world or developed countries had already booked not only 2 times, but even up to 5 times requirement of the vaccine for their total population. And that has created a panic with the developing world that if the big countries or the richer countries are going to book the vaccine and keep it for them, what happens for them? Even today, there are 192 countries who have signed for COVAX. But if the COVAX does not get their quota of vaccine, how the Gavi is going to distribute it equitably to everybody else?
Yeah. So getting back to the manufacturing question, and Jin, you can jump in here as well. Shouldn't the focus be on just getting the COVID vaccines out of vanquishing, getting rid of this entire pandemic, and then we worry about excess capacity once this is over with?
Yeah, for us, I think that is what is our plan. The only thing is that the launching of the other products will be delayed that much.
Okay. All right. Jim, would you like to jump in here?
Okay. I fully agree with, Dr. Shresh, opinion. So there is no, further, the more different, idea on that. But I believe that, the supply constraint will continue in the meantime, I guess, So, but however, the supply constraint will be getting improved by continuous rollout of vaccines in more countries and effort in establishment of more capacity. The remaining question is when it ends, though. Regarding demand in the countries having fast rollout, confirmed cases continue to fall. However, this kind of fast rollout is currently limited to most of the high-income countries only. Also, there is concern in association with the new variants that have emerged in the recent months. And how long does COVID vaccine immunity last is still unknown. Thus, it is believed that the supply constraint will last for a while globally, at least.
Jim, if I could interrupt here, I mean, you're making some excellent points. If I could interrupt and ask you, is the current manufacturing focus on COVID, is it too narrow? Should we pull out? Should we broaden our lens and think about the next pandemic?
Okay. Sure. Actually, that could be a very, reasonable question, I think. But however, since the SAPI was established in 2017, it has supported new platforms to expedite diverse vaccine development, not only single one, and manufacturing for the pandemic and endemics such as Lassa, and also has been playing a key role in pandemic responses, as you know. So as you may have heard, due to the urgent needs of the COVID-19 vaccines, new platforms such as mRNA and viral vectors could be commercialized in a very quick manner for mass vaccination. Given those kind of platforms can be used of various pathogens, they accumulate data and experience through this pandemic period, enable vaccine developments for the next pandemic more expedite. In a more streamlined manner, yes.
Okay, excellent information. It's always so good to find out what's happening at the manufacturing level. Dr. Patrick, earlier we were talking, chit-chatting before we started this panel, and you said that you'd looked at the last 10 pandemics in history. What lessons did you take away from that?
Thank you very much, Lisa. Before that, I just wanted to contribute on the manufacturing capacity. So we, as ADB, we engaged with a number of countries that have expressed interest in manufacturing. Indonesia, the biopharma, is keen to expand its capacity to produce COVID vaccine and other vaccine, as some of the members have said. There's also interest from Bangladesh, Pakistan, Kazakhstan, Thailand. So I think that out of this pandemic, we may be able to have more capacity in our region than before the pandemic. And as ADB, we have the financing to support countries through our private sector operations or through our sovereign operation. Now, coming to your question, if you look at the last 100 years, the last time we had such a huge pandemic was in 1917, 1918. This was around during the First World War. So there were many soldiers that were fighting across the world. And when the war ended, many of them went back to their countries. And that's how the pandemic spread. The Spanish flu spread very rapidly after the war. Then I've had a chance to look at the various pandemics that have happened since then. And I think that the lesson that learned out of that is that countries that have had serious pandemics, and if you look at the SARS pandemic, we look at the H1N1 pandemic and also the MERS pandemic, countries that were affected heavily like Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, by H1N1, SARS, People's Republic of China, MERS, Korea, they were more prepared for this pandemic than many countries. And so it was clear how to involve the public sector, how to communicate to the population, how to involve the private sector, how to involve the community. And so out of this pandemic, because of the nature of and the size of this pandemic, hopefully countries will be much better prepared for the next pandemic. And we are very much engaged in the resources that we're providing, not just for the COVID pandemic, but also how to use the resources to prepare for the next big pandemic.
And Dr. Patrick, once these vaccines that we've been talking about, it's been a difficult manufacturing process, but once they arrive in a country, what have you observed as being some of the biggest impediments to getting them distributed to the population?
It's because it takes a lot of logistics to be able to distribute the vaccines. You need cold chain trucks, you need warehouses, cold chain warehouses. You need the IT platform to be able to monitor who's got the first dose and the second dose. How do you remind people to come for the second dose? You need to figure out, are people getting any adverse events? How do they report that to the government so that you can say 10 people have had some complication? So there's so many moving parts that requires coordination across government, and also for countries to think outside the box. This is bigger than just the health sector. So you require to think about how can you mobilize the disaster assistant teams to be able to support the Minister of Health? How do you involve the military to support the Minister of Health in terms of logistics and transportation of vaccines? How do you involve other sectors, emergency workers? In the US, for instance, they are involving optometrists to give injections, veterinarians to give injections, health workers. So it's basically looking at what capacity do you have in a country to be able to vaccinate as so many people in a very short period of time.
All right. And I guess this is also contributing to why it's been so hard to develop a tracking mechanism for people who've already had the vaccine. All of these same issues are at play, I presume. All right. I've got another question here on governance, and I'd like to throw this to everyone. This lady writes in, she says, I am Rochelle from the Office of Civil Defense. To Professor Ruth and the rest, how can governance stir confidence in the vaccine? Scientific evidence has been provided and communicated to the public, but how can we harness the crucial aspect of governance? Would anyone like to jump in on this? Ruth, would you like to go first?
Governance. Well, I guess what I would say is that it is important for individuals to have confidence in how their government has assessed vaccines and what the process has been. I can say that in the US, it's been a very transparent process. I think we have always prided ourselves on transparency, but I would say in the year of 2020, we worked to be more transparent than ever. All of our meetings around vaccine approval for use are by law are public, and our broadcast and we make vaccine available. I think, to be very honest, our plans, I think where we fell down a bit is that we have national guidance, but plans are mostly made by states. And so we have variation between states and not uniformity. And I think that, one lesson from our country, perhaps to other countries, is to think as appropriate to think nationally in terms of their plans for use and for distribution.
All right, thank you. And Undersecretary Cabotaje, I see you nodding.
Yes.
What are your views on this?
In terms of the governance structure of the Philippines, we have established a national level structure, which really caters to the vaccination. So the president has appointed a vaccine czar who looks at a cluster that has different components from negotiation, from procurement to implementation, and all of these. We have a robust system of leadership where we are accountable and transparent. No, we tell them what negotiations are ongoing, what are the prices of the vaccines that we are procuring. After we have sealed all the negotiations, we have structures at the national level that provide the general guidance. But we are a devolved, decentralized health and other structures. So the implementation is at the subnational, the local government units. So the administration of the vaccine is with the local level. So the national government provides guidance. This is a multi-agency. It's not only the Department of Health, multi-agency, all agencies, including the security sector. And the national, we coordinate at different levels, subnational, what we call the regional, and at the local levels who do the administration. There's also a governance structure where they have vaccine operation centers. They identify what are the needs. There are planning committees, there are logistics committees, communication committees, coordination committees, all those structure in order that we have a coordinated structure to address the issues that are arising and to be able to deploy our vaccines. That's the biggest challenge, to deploy our vaccines, that they are safe and effective until they reach our vaccinee. Mm-hmm. And after that, we also monitor post vaccination. We are going to tag them to our information system where we can monitor the adverse events after immunization, and we are planning to do that for at least 1 year to look at how the adverse events have been doing for the
with the hope being, of course, in time, as there's more of a track record developed, people will start to feel better. I'd like you all to weigh in and just simplify the entire topic of this panel for me. Vaccinations in Southeast Asia, they've been picking up momentum, a bit slow to get going, several issues as we've been discussing. What will the trajectory look like from here on in? Are things going to speed up? Is it going to be a very slow, gentle acceleration? Or will we suddenly get a flood of vaccines? Would anyone like to jump in here and tell us what the next year is going to look like in terms of vaccine rollout?
I think by next year, there will be at least about additional 6 manufacturers who will be coming into the fray. They will get their products licensed. One thing you must remember that this is the first time this vaccine has been licensed for emergency use license or emergency use authorization. That means it is available only to the governments. This vaccine is still not available in the open market for the common people. So therefore, it is the responsibility of government to ensure the equitable distribution, and as per the recommendation of WHO or their own health authorities, to give it to the targeted groups in a phased manner. Having said so, I think I'm quite confident that by end of 2021, there will be more than 2 to 3 billion doses capacity which will be available globally. And that will certainly ease out the sort of difficulties that the countries are facing as of now to procure a sufficient quantity of vaccine.
All right. We've just had a really interesting question coming in. So I'll change track now and ask you. Chung B. Lee would like to ask each of you, what's your opinion on compulsory vaccination? Jin, I see you smiling. Would you like to go first with this one?
Actually, I also thought about that. The kind of a lot of public argument and debate on the compulsory vaccination. But in South, not only in Southeast Asia, but the Korea actually, we have a little bit different culture in accommodating the government's or countries' requests for the vaccination, particularly in Korea. So I believe that actually, even though there are a lot of the debates on that, it's because many people actually claim that this is our rights whether to decide vaccination or not. However, I believe in Korea at least our population are relatively willing to get vaccinated according to the recommendation by the government. However, as you know, most countries, including Korea, don't have diverse option at the moment, at least for the time being, first quarter and second quarter of this year. So because of that, actually people sometimes now having a very discussion which product I would like to get vaccinated. That is the more, the kind of the arguing points in Korea. So anyhow, it is very interesting to see the current, the discussion in the public domain. Yes.
Dr. Ruth, mandatory vaccination is something that could work.
So, what I would say about that is better not to compel people, better to have people want to get vaccinated. Our experience has been, we do in certain settings, for example, in hospitals, we compel people to get flu vaccine in our country. So you can't work in the hospital if you haven't been vaccinated against influenza in influenza season. But that's very narrow and very specialized. Our experience has been that people can find loopholes. They can find ways around. And my view is, the arguments that we've made with people, aside from their health, is if they want their world to get back to something like the way it was, if they want to be able to do the things in their lives that are important, sending their children to school in person, getting together with their families, having the kinds of social engagements that they want, having their economies thrive again, the only way to get there is through vaccination. And I would rather persuade than compel.
And Undersecretary, would you like to jump in here, Dr. Myrna, and tell us your view on the Philippines?
Yes, many sectors are pushing for mandatory compulsory vaccination, but the national stand is still free, prior, and informed consent. Actually, we have mandatory immunization for children. We have laws on that, but we are not even reaching the 100%. So this is for a bigger population, very difficult. I agree with Dr. Ruth. I think we should convince them nicely that it is good for them and their families and the people they work with to be vaccinated. Thank you.
Okay, we are very close to being out of time, and I just want to put a final question to each of you and get each of you to answer. And Patrick, we'll start with you. When do you think Southeast Asia is going to get back to a certain level of normalcy? Maybe not back to where we were before, but somewhat normal. What's your take?
That's a very difficult question, Lisa, and with a lot of speculation. But I think that Southeast Asia and Asia in general has done a good job in terms of trying to address COVID compared to some other regions. And looking at the programs that countries are putting in place, the ambition to have as many people vaccinated as possible, and if the vaccines are made available, because the biggest challenge with vaccine that we haven't talked about is regulation. The regulatory capacity to approve as many vaccines as possible is very limited. And so if that also is expanded and the countries, DMCs, the developing member countries are able to get vaccines, I foresee a scenario whereby in 2022 we'll be able to go back to normal. Of course, there are caveats. If new variants come into the market and they are spreading faster, and we have several waves beyond that, then that would be problematic. But perhaps in 2022, with most of the population vaccinated, we'll be able to have some semblance of normalcy.
It's only a year away. Jin, would you like to jump in with your prediction?
It's very difficult, but actually, I found the survey and the forecast in the public domain, considering rollout status and the plan. It is expected that it will be fully recovered in the late 2022, and at the latest, the early 2023. But we don't know. Actually, it's because I believe that there will be more vaccine products licensed incoming in next year, with more accessible and affordable quantity and vaccines. So in such case, maybe it can be expedited. But I believe that late 2022 and early 2023 is very reasonable, expectation for a full normalcy, in our life.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Suresh, are you predicting a similar time frame based on the vaccines that you've been churning out over there at the SII?
Yeah, I fully agree with Dr. Jin that it could be late 2022 or early 23. But there is a caveat, provided we do not encounter any additional mutation or any serious mutation and require a newer vaccine. Because today we have already seen 4 types of mutations coming from South Africa, from Brazil, from UK, from California. And there is a talk that there is another mutation which has taken place in Brazil. So if something like that happens and we have to again reinvent a new candidate vaccine and add that as a combination vaccine, then this time frame could be, I think, pushed down. But if the things remain as they are today, and the current vaccines, which are sort of found to be effective against the existing mutations, I think it should be reasonable to expect by late 22 or early 23 to have some semblance of normalcy.
All right, Dr. Ruth, we'll get your take on this. Given what we know about the variants that have emerged so far, what's your prediction for when we can start going back somewhat to normal?
So I have to say that I need to defer to my esteemed colleagues on this panel, who probably have a much better bird's eye view of the situation in Southeast Asia. So I will defer to them and imagine that it will be later in 2022 or early 2023.
No worries at all. And finally, final word going to Dr. Myrna right now from her perch over in the Philippines. When are you hoping, Dr. Myrna, that your country can get back to normal and Southeast Asia as a whole?
Our perspective is not going back to normal. It's going back to a better normal, because we emphasize that vaccines are only one part of the solution in bringing the COVID-19 pandemic to an end. Even with vaccines, people must continue with important prevention measures already in place. Our wearing of masks, physical distancing, washing hands, avoiding crowded places and settings. So it will take some time. Maybe 2022, 2023. We will see how the scenario is evolving. And as my co-panelists were saying, it depends on how fast the vaccine, the virus will mutate because we have to catch up with different variants. They say if you immunize fast, then you can also prevent the variants from moving. But the vaccination is not the only solution. We need to continue what we are doing for prevention. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you to all of you for joining us on this panel today. Thank you for your expertise, all of the hard work that you've been putting in. We know it hasn't always been easy, but we're starting to see the results. And from all of us, we truly appreciate all of your efforts. Thank you so much for joining us today. Well, coming up, it's been lovely to see you all. Coming up in a few minutes, we're going to have another panel discussion on what a recovery in Southeast Asia could look like. But first, though, we have a video to show you put together by the ADB about meeting the COVID-19 challenge. Let's take a look.
Due to increasing flows of people and goods across borders, the Greater Mekong subregion is a hotspot for communicable diseases such as rabies, measles, dengue, cholera, and avian flu. But the 6 GMS countries have done well to keep infections of COVID-19 to a minimum, at just over 6,000 at the start of September, according to data from the World Health Organization and the Johns Hopkins University.
The success of GMS countries in controlling COVID-19 is not surprising. The key is years of effort to improve their ability to detect, respond, and control emerging disease threats so they can mitigate a pandemic's human health, economic, and social impact.
Through 2 decades of investments, ADB has supported GMS countries' efforts to develop core health system capacities for responding to public health threats, while simultaneously building a foundation for enhanced regional cooperation on health security. That includes $125 million in loans and grants to Cambodia, Laos PDR, Myanmar, and Vietnam through the GMS Health Security Project. The project allows funds to be quickly reprogrammed to address major public health emergencies. When COVID-19 struck, reallocated funds helped government purchase PPEs, ventilators, bedside monitors, and other equipment. The project also allowed governments to adopt new measures to control COVID-19, including the rapid dispatch of thermal scanners to points of entry. Myanmar, for example, will receive $30 million in additional financing to help the government make immediate investments in 31 district and township hospitals across the country, including capacity building for the health system to respond to COVID-19 and other future public health threats. In May, the project allocated $20 million for Laos PDR to purchase essential medical equipment, including testing kits, medical devices, and ambulances.
ในนั้นเป็นรวมของที่ ADB เพิ่นช่วยเหลือมาเพื่อว่าป้องกันเฮาเองเป็นตัวอย่างที่ว่าซบมือเป็นหมวกเป็นมัดอัดปากเนาะเป็นเสื้อกาวเป็นสิ่งที่ป้องกันเฮาเองเพื่อบ่ให้พยาธินี้ระบาดไปสู่บ่อนอื่นแล้วก็สู้แรงงานที่มาพักเสาอยู่นี่แล้วก็ภาคส่วนเขาเจ้าก็ต้องมีมัดมีหยังใส่เพื่อป้องกันบ่ให้แพร่ระบาดจุดหนักก็แม่นพยาธิโควิด -19 ระยะนี้ที่กำลังระบาดอยู่นี่
The project is in line with the GMS Health Cooperation Strategy, under which countries are committed to improving health systems performance in response to public health threats.
ระบาดแล้วพวกเรามีแต่นั่งแล้วเห็นว่าการระบาดต่างๆอันนี้ได้ลดความรุนแรงลงการร่วมมือระหว่างประเทศในรูปแม่น้ำคลองนี้ที่ให้พวกเราได้ร่วมมือกันใกล้ชิดกันหลายขึ้นใกล้ชิดกันหลายขึ้นและมีประสิทธิผลหลายขึ้นในการควบคุมพยาธิต่อ
With proactive planning and investment in health and other sectors, and the support of partners like ADB, the 6 countries of the Greater Mekong subregion are meeting the challenge of this pandemic and ensure a faster economic recovery.